Okay.
Oh, there we go. Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Link Senior webinar. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin today. We are providing one free NCAP, NAB, and NCCDP CEU credit to participants who are joining us live today. To be eligible for the CEU credit, you need to remain on the webinar for the full hour, and the Zoom meeting room is going to track how long you stay in the room and will send that to me as a digital report. We are not able to provide CEUs to people who join only by phone. At the end of the webinar today, I will share a link to the required CEU survey evaluation link in the webinar room chat box. And I will also share this survey link by email to all participants this afternoon. So please check your email spam folder in case that message lands there. You must fill out that survey no later than midnight this Thursday, April 16th, to be eligible for CEU credit. And if you're not looking for CEU credit, we still want your feedback, so please go ahead and fill out the survey as well. CEU certificates will be issued by email on Friday, April 17th, and again, please check your spam folder in case it lands there. I'll now hand it over to Charles D. Vilmorin, CEO and co-founder of Link Senior.
Thanks a lot, Megan. Hi, everyone. My name is Charles, and as Megan said it, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Link Senior. And I'm very happy to be here today with Penny, Penny Cook, the president and CEO of the Pioneer Network. And the presentation today is going to be about making it happen. Now is the time to change the length of aging. And I'm very excited to have you. Thank you for joining us. These are unprecedented times, and we will be discussing a little bit what's going on. But obviously, Penny is one of the big experts when it comes to anti-ageism, and this is part of our normal webinar track. So when I say this, I'd like to give you a little bit of feedback on, a little bit of background on what these webinars are about. More than 2 years ago, we were hearing from people like you working in senior living and senior care that you wanted more quality education. And often you didn't even have the ability to leave your community to get that education. And so we thought it would be a great idea to support you in what you do every day, which is to serve the older adult, and started this successful webinar series that we've now called Champions for Change. And we've had amazing speakers touch upon various topics. But the main central aspect is how can we help you with best practices that link person-centered care, understanding the older adult and how we can serve them better, anti-ageism, and resident engagement, right? So the one thing here that I'd like to invite you is if you think of anyone that we haven't had or a topic that we haven't discussed before, please feel free to reach out. Just to give you a little bit about Link Senior, we provide a resident engagement platform. So we help resident engagement staff, activity directors, life enrichment professionals, rec therapists, engage the older adult, especially people that are losing or have lost self-recreation abilities. So independent living, assisted living, memory care, and nursing homes. We're very proud of the fact that we are now evidence-based. Our work was published in September, and we were able to measure the impact of the use of our platform. As I mentioned, these are unprecedented times, and so I did want to acknowledge the fact that we're all going through a lot with this COVID-19 quote-unquote crisis. But I think that for me, the main message is that I want to thank you, people working in senior living and senior care, because you are the ones that are taking care of our older adults. And we've always been very grateful, but I think that especially through this time, a big thank you for everyone doing that. I'd like to share with you the fact that because of everything that's going on, Link Senior has developed an additional track for these webinars. So as you might know, we do webinars on a monthly basis that are free for you to have quality educations and access to free CEUs. We've actually developed another track also to everything related to COVID-19 and how we can help you further. And with that, we also launched a very big initiative called #ActivityStrong, right? And I think that speaks about a few things that are important when we think about the typical activity director, right? And I think it speaks about not only the resilience, but the amazing opportunity that we have in front of us for our discipline, our work, and our industry to shine as we serve the older adult. So with that, I'd like to take a minute and tell you about the agenda. As always, I'm going to give a little bit of background on our session today, and then after that, I'm going to welcome Penny. So usually here's the place where, I go into a detailed analysis and updates on the need for resident engagement, but I thought I would probably keep it shorter so we have more time with Penny, one, and two, kind of put that in the context of our session today. So again, we're extremely lucky to have one of the experts when it comes to anti-ageism. Her name is Penny Cook. She's a president and CEO of the Pioneer Network, which is, as you might know, and Penny will share through her presentation, it's a 22-year-old nonprofit organization dedicated to changing the culture of aging and the culture of long-term care. And I think this is something where we still have work. There's been a lot of progress, but we still have work. And aligning our organizations on the work of Pioneer Network and hearing from Penny is how we can help further and enhance the quality of life of the older adults that we serve. For over 25 years, Penny has provided education, training, advocacy, and support related to elders. And obviously, Penny is passionate about helping us value and respect our own aging as well as those that we support. I've talked a little bit about myself. I think that the one thing that I'm the most proud of is that I was fortunate enough to go through MEPAP 1, which is part of the education to become an activity director when I started Link Senior. With that, I'd like to share with you one of my favorite quotes. You probably saw it on some of these webinars before. I think the reason why I wanted to share this quote today is that we sometimes forget that us human beings are all individuals, and this source of purpose is what defines us. And when we have the opportunity of serving the older adults, a lot of us sometimes forget that some people need help, right? And so every individuality needs to be respected. And if you look at what an activity director does, a resident engagement professional does, that is what they do, right? And that's very important. And I think that is why we, in resident engagement, activities or life enrichment, we are essential, right? There's been a lot of discussion in COVID-19 related topics. Activities are essential. The lessons learned, and we will be delivering more on that topic through Link Senior, but I think there's three pieces of advice that I wanted to share with you, is that one, in activities, we tend to forget about self-care. It's extremely important to never forget that. The second piece is, there's never been a time where we need to be as efficient or more efficient than we've been before. And the third one is, that's the biggest advice that we have for anyone in the field today, is we want to make sure that every resident is engaged, right? We know that senior living and senior care, unfortunately, sees a lot of isolation. Through these times, there's probably a moment where we want to make sure that we try to act on this as much as possible. That's a quick introduction to then share with you what is the promise of resident engagement, and I'll tie that back into the work of the Pioneer Network, and that is, our work is about collaborating with the older adults that we serve so that they all can live with purpose. With that, I'd love to turn it up to Penny. Thank you, Penny, for joining us. And actually, I'm going to give you control, so you can do that. And I'll let you take it from there, Penny. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Charles. And Megan, thanks for helping us with this. And welcome to all of you. It's so great to see so many people. And I already see people using the chat, which I love, because I'm going to ask you today to keep on chatting. This is meant to be interactive, and I know that through Zoom we can be interactive using the chat and using the Q&A box too. So although we'll leave some time for questions at the end, I'd love your input throughout as I'm talking, and I'm going to ask you for some input as well. So I already see that some of you are using the chat box and saying hello and telling us where you're from. I'd love to know from all of you too, your positions. If most of you are activity professionals in the life enrichment world, if you're here for other reasons because you're just so interested in this topic. So keep on chatting and tell us not only who you are, but what you do as well. And thank you for doing that. So I really think this topic of making it happen and changing the lens of aging, talking about ageism, is more important now than almost ever before. When Charles and I first discussed doing this, I believe it was in 2019, Charles, when we first talked about this. And in the beginning of 2020, we set a date. Obviously, when we set that date, we had no idea what was going to be going on right now. And that's why I really say that it's more important than ever before. And we're going to talk about that and talk about why. And thank you all for chatting in. I appreciate it. I'm going to be looking at the chat box as I'm talking, so excuse me for that. You know, I always like to start with a story and to really personalize things. And Charles, I'm trying to move my presentation and it's not letting me.
I can do it for you.
If you want to jump in and I can let you know when, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, let me know.
Thank you so much. If you want to go to the next slide, that would be great. So I do like to start with a story, and I like to tell you about my grandmother. This is my grandmother, Ernestine Askew. We called her Erna, and yes, that is me sitting on her lap at Christmas time. My grandmother was really the reason that I do the work that I do. She also was my greatest role model about growing older. And I say that I had the opportunity as a child to spend every day with her. Both of my parents worked full time out of the house, and so my grandmother took care of me before I went to school full time. And I look back on it now, and of course at the time I didn't realize how special it was and what she did for me, and now I obviously see that. But she just incorporated me into her life. And so I got to see all these aspects of her life as she grew older. My grandmother worked in a cigar factory. And when she stopped doing that work, she really enjoyed all of her passions and hobbies in life. And what that meant for me is that when she went to knit or crochet, I learned how to knit and crochet. When she gardened, I gardened. When she cooked, I cooked. And when she took a nap, so did I. I think the only special thing she did for me is she would turn on Captain Kangaroo and some different children's shows in the morning. And what I learned from my grandmother is that as we grow older, our passions don't necessarily have to change. Our hobbies don't necessarily have to change. Our life routine doesn't necessarily have to change, but it might be that we have to change how we do it a little bit. We might have to rely on some other people to help support us. And that's what I saw from her. Now, my grandmother, and obviously for me as well, we were together because I lived and grew up in an area where all of my family was around me. Not only all of my grandparents, but all of my aunts and uncles and great aunts and uncles, they were all around. There was so much family around. What that meant for my grandmother is as she started experiencing some declines, both cognitively and physically, all of the family came in to assist as we could. And I look back on it and I'm so proud of my family because we didn't take over. We just helped to support my grandmother to do the things that she wanted to do. She hosted an open house on Christmas Eve every year for family and some friends, but there were at least 50 of us that would come to this open house. As she got older, she wasn't able to do all of the cooking and cleaning and all of those things to host. And so the family jumped in, and we did some of those things for her so that when it came time for Christmas Eve to welcome everybody into her home, she was still the hostess. She was still the matriarch. She still did all of that. And it was just so beautiful as I think back on it now. She was really my greatest teacher. Now I want to tell you about somebody else important in my life. Charles, if you could go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
This is my mother, and that's my son there with her. And my mother lives down in Florida. She is 86, and she lives away from a lot of her family and a lot of her support system. Like so many New Yorkers, that's where I'm originally from. She moved down to Florida after she retired, and she had so many friends down there. And now at 86, a lot of her friends have passed away, and she doesn't have family down there either. You can just imagine what that's like for my sister and I as we're dealing with COVID-19 and having my mom in Florida without any support. And it's interesting for me to watch how she's grown older. Her life is a little bit different than my grandmother's. My mother is fiercely independent. She was a banker throughout her career and hasn't really relied on a lot of other people in life. And I see her growing older, and I see some of the struggles and challenges and dilemmas she's facing. It's very different when you don't have that support system around. You could go to the next slide, Charles.
Mm-hmm.
And what's indicative is what's happened in those, almost 50 years between my grandmother growing older and my mother growing older. We've seen all of these different systems of care and support develop for older people. And we have the range now, things that we never used to have before. We never called different communities life plan communities. At that time that my grandmother was growing older, we didn't have assisted living communities. We didn't have the greenhouse model. We didn't have the household model. All of these things, we've developed so many different things and so many different programs to support older adults. And I commend us for that. That's wonderful. But I think that what we'll be talking about today is some of the barriers that we put into place, not intentionally, but unknowingly, that sort of impact the type of care that we really want to provide and the type of support that we really want to provide. You can go to the next slide, Charles.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to give you a timeline, and I want to talk about Pioneer Network a little bit as I give you this timeline. Pioneer Network, as Charles said, started actually now 23 years ago in 1997, and we'll see that on the timeline. And Pioneer Network really tried to move forward this idea of culture change. And when we say culture change in relationship to what we do, what we're talking about is changing that traditional institutional culture of care and support. And this was a movement that started 50 years ago. It started in the 1970s, and we see that on the timeline. Back in 1977, Barry Barkin, who was one of our founders of Pioneer Network, began the Live Oak Institute and this concept of regenerative communities. And what that means is that all generations play a huge role in communities, and the generation of elders and elderhood is embraced for the meaning and purpose that elders can provide and for what they actually contribute to the development and enhancement of a community. And then as time has gone on, we've seen so many different parts of the culture change movement. The Untie the Elderly movement, and yes, that's what it was called back in the 80s, and that was the anti-restraint movement. We had OBRA 87, the Omnibus Reconciliation Act, that really elevated quality of life to quality of care. That was hugely important for activity professionals as well. We had the quality of care standards that were published by CMS in the late 1980s. Next slide. And then we had the development of these organizations that were really trying to push forward this idea of culture change, person-centered living, persons-directed living. And that first began with the Eden Alternative in 1991. You'll see Pioneer Network in 97. And then we had these different models, different approaches of how we provide care and support. And we saw the first greenhouse home open in 2003. And then we saw the culture change movement expand. We developed a relationship even more so than ever before with CMS. And CMS promoted person-centered living, person-directed living, and we tried to get statewide coalitions to advance this movement across the country. Next slide. In 2006, we published the Artifacts of Culture Change so that communities could actually have some sort of measurement guide of how they were doing in changing their culture and also get ideas about what they could do. We had a number of different symposiums with CMS. And then, as we all know, we saw the revision of the nursing home regulations back in 2016. Think about the number of years that was between 1987 and 2016. And then I've added this to the slide. It wasn't on obviously before, and that's COVID-19. Because I really believe in this timeline of culture change and this timeline of the movement, that this is going to be important. I think we're going to look back at this time, and I think it's guiding decisions, it's guiding our work in a way that I don't think we ever expected before. And I think we're going to hear more about this as we talk about culture change and person-centered care. Next slide. So my question then is, have we made a difference? Or the next question is going to be, is there a barrier in our way? And I think, of course, we've made a difference. We've come so far in the world of providing care and support to older people in the past 50 years. Even talking about the Untie the Elderly movement, and we see now that restraints have been removed from nursing homes. They have been removed from assisted living communities for the most part. We don't see that anymore. We've made tremendous, tremendous strides. But I will say that there is a barrier in our way. I'd say that we aren't doing everything that we could do to truly make a person's life based on them, to truly put them in the center of their care and support. And I have a theory about what that barrier is, if we go to the next slide. I really believe it's ageism. I believe that as a society, we are an ageist society, and that does impact the care and support that we provide to elders. I believe that we're seeing that right now. Now, there's a few definitions to ageism. There's many definitions to ageism. I just want to give you a few of them today. Ageism overall is really just a prejudice and discrimination against a person based on age, a particular age group. That's the umbrella definition. There's ageism that happens at any age. I'll tell you, as a young social worker coming out of grad school, I definitely felt ageism, obviously in a very different way than maybe my 86-year-old mother does. For the topic today, we're going to be talking about ageism regarding older people. I will just also add, because I'm sort of big on language, and we'll talk about that a little bit, I really do not like the word elderly. This is just part of the definition, so it's not a word I would normally use. The World Health Organization talks about ageism as a stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination against people on the basis of their age. And this definition by the Collins Dictionary is one that I think is so appropriate right now. Unacceptable behavior that occurs as a result of the belief that older people are of less value than younger people. My friend and colleague, Jill Vitale-Awesome, who is the CEO of the Eden Alternative, talks about ageism, and she uses a definition that I also like that's pretty straightforward. It's the fear of our future self. Think about that. Ageism is the fear of our future self, because we are all aging. And it is the only ism that affects all of us. Think about all the isms that we hear about right now. Ageism truly is the only ism that we're all a part of. Let's go to the next slide. Before we can talk about ageism in respect to care and support that we provide to older people, I think it's important to look at our own personal awareness and thoughts about aging. This is something, all of these pictures I took myself. It's the images that we can find of aging in our society. The first one, and this is the most disturbing in my opinion, is a diaper cake kit. This was found at one of the party stores that you can walk down and the milestone birthday aisle, and a milestone birthday is usually one that ends in 0, and you can find these things. These are made up of rolled up adult diapers, and the signs, if you can't see them, say Old Fart Freeway, Cranky Corner. It's how we depict aging. And Shauna, these images anger me too. Thank you for that. Next, walk down the greeting card aisle. So a couple of years ago, my brother-in-law was turning 70, and I've known my brother-in-law for a very long time, and I wanted to get him a funny birthday card. And so I started looking at, cards regarding getting older. And it was so disturbing. I think I spent literally 20 minutes looking for a card that was humorous, but that wasn't making fun of getting older. Like this one. I'd like to buy a bowel. Game shows for people your age. Just think about that the next time you buy a greeting card. And here's one also from the party store, the car magnet, caution, senior driver. And you see how older people are depicted as hunched over, using canes, the long chin, the long nose. I don't know if you've all experienced or all heard about the way some schools are celebrating the 100th day of school, but it's dressed like a 100-year-old day.
Yeah.
And some people think that that's cute, that that's funny. But if you actually look on Pinterest, or if you go to one of the party stores during this period of time, you'll see the stereotypes and the depictions that we're talking about. And we'll talk about this a little more, but we know that not everyone who's growing older looks the same. And I think that's so important to remember. And then we can walk down the skincare aisle. Actually, we could just, find these in any store. And we see, if something doesn't say anti-aging on it, we see something like this, absolutely ageless. What does absolutely ageless mean exactly? Does it mean that we're wiping away all the signs of aging? That's sort of how I look at it. Now, I know that some of these things are funny, they're humorous, and humor is not a bad thing. But I would challenge us to think about our thoughts and our actions and our language. And sometimes it's really hard for us to compartmentalize what's humorous with our reality and what we're doing. If we use this as humor, but we're working with people who are growing older, how do we reconcile that? And are we using this as humor because we have fear, because we have some degree of fear of aging, like Jill said in her definition, fear of our future self? Let's go to the next slide. Now, we're also seeing ageism come up so much right now with COVID-19. Look at these headlines that I just pulled out, and I could have actually filled the page with headlines about ageism. Ageism is making the pandemic worse. As COVID-19 spreads, so do negative stereotypes. The disregard for the elderly that's woven into American culture is hurting everyone. Defeating the pandemic means confronting ageism and ableism, from my friend Ashton Applewhite, who has done so much amazing work in this area. And this doesn't include some of the things that maybe you've heard. Have you heard boomer remover? It's a hashtag that's going around. Now, thank goodness for everyone using the hashtag boomer remover. We have a lot of people who are also saying, get this away, and commenting on this. We're also seeing, especially coming out of Europe, the conversations about the decisions about treatment. In our own country, we've heard people who have said, maybe we need to sacrifice older people, I will put that in quotes, for the good of the economy of the United States. So I think that this conversation that we're having is so timely. And I think that the one thing that gives me hope in this is that we're talking about it right now. We're talking about the ageism that is happening. We're talking about the words being used. Charles, this was just a great time to have this webinar.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
So let's go to the next slide. Because this is what we have to remember. What we have to remember is what happens if we're not aging. If we're not aging, and we talk about that ageless comment for the skin cream, if we're not aging, we're not living, and we're not breathing. And we know what that means. I don't have to tell you, it means death, because aging does equal life. And I think that it's so important for us to remember just that simple statement: aging equals life. I don't think we remember it enough. So now is the chance that we're going to be able to have a bit of a conversation. If you can go to actually the next slide, Charles.
This one?
Yeah, we're going to have a conversation about this. And I love some of the things coming through the chat with your comments about ageism. The ageism happening really is disturbing. We're going through life together. We're never alone. You're exactly right, Consuelo. And this is very sad, Tammy. So these are some of the questions that I want you to ask yourself. And I'm not going to say that you have to answer these questions in the chat, but if you want to answer some of these questions, please do, or please tell me some of the things that they evoke in you just when I ask them and talk about them. And thank you, Irene. That is so true, and sometimes lying about your age as well. I want to talk about this. So these are the have you ever questions. Have you ever lied about your age? And some people immediately will say, of course I haven't. I've never done anything like that. I'm going to tell you the story of a friend of mine, because I think that until this story came up between us, she would have said, no, I've never lied about my age either. But I have a friend who's in her early 70s, and she was on Match.com a few years ago. And we were talking about her experience, and she said, oh, I thank you for all the chats coming in. She was telling me about her experience, and she said, what I do is I post pictures of myself from what I look like today, but I make myself about 5 years younger. And then on the first date, I tell people how old I really am. And I said, oh my goodness, you're starting, a potential relationship, on the basis of a lie. How can you do that? And she said, if I tell people my age, they're not going to look at me. And how sad is that she felt that way? That she said that if I tell people my age, that they're not going to look at me. I have other friends, and maybe you've experienced it too, that they're saying that they're 39 again. And it's because they really don't want to give their real age. I'm going to read some of the chats going on. I'm 51, but I say I'm 85 and look forward to it. I've turned 30 for 3 years now. Then we have people who've never lied about their age. Some people want to cover up the physical signs of aging, and I see that we have some chats about that too. I'll tell you, that's such a topic that we could talk about for a very long time, because we know, for instance, that lots of women especially color their hair. But I want to tell you a story about a male friend of mine, because I think that this illustrates the conundrum that we're in. He last year lost his job in Seattle. He works in the tech industry, and he's 60 years old. And he's graying. In fact, most of his hair is gray. It's quite short and cropped, so you can hardly see it, but he notices it. And he started looking for a job in the tech industry in Seattle. And what he realized is he was competing for these jobs against people who were much younger than he was. And he was quite self-conscious of that. And after a number of interviews, he was not getting jobs. And he thought, okay, I have the experience. I feel like I have the talent. I have the skill set. What's preventing me from getting these jobs? And he thought, I wonder if it's because I'm older. I wonder if it's because I'm 60. I wonder if it's because of my gray hair. He colored his hair for the first time ever. And he struggled with that so much because it wasn't something he wanted to do. It wasn't who he was, but he thought that he had to in our society. And you know what? He got a job right after that. It reinforced that belief. Now, I say that because I have female friends who tell me the same thing. When I retire, I'll stop coloring my hair. Now, I'm not against anybody coloring their hair. I will tell you, I've chosen to have mine not be colored. I'm not against that at all. But I think we have to ask ourselves the reason that we're doing it. Is it for ourselves and that we like to see ourselves a certain way? Or is it because other people think we should be a certain way or look a certain way? I want to also ask you if you've blamed age for something negative in your life. Do you ever wake up in the morning and say, oh my goodness, I'm so old, my knees. Oh my goodness, my hands, they're so arthritic, it's because of my age. Have you used the term senior moment? Or have you stereotyped people of a certain age? I will fully admit to this one. I will tell you that I'm a bit of a fast driver. One might say I'm a little aggressive sometimes. And if somebody's in front of me that's going slower, I find myself assuming that it's a person of a certain age. Now, I'm quite aware of that, and I reframe that, and I stop that, but it happens. These are just things to think about. There's no right and wrong here, but I think that before we can talk about ageism and the work that we do, we need to look at our own ageist thoughts. So I'm going to just look through the chat a little bit because I see that there's so much going on here.
Can I add one thing, Penny?
Sure.
I was also checking the chat box, and I think that there's a lot of people saying that it's sad, and I think the first thing is to recognize that yes, it's sad, but I think there's also a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of cool things happening. And I've experienced that myself. The minute you recognize that it's sad and you do something about it, that's what's cool. And I think that in your work, in our work, there is so much cool stuff to do. And when you talk about anti-ageism, sometimes people forget or they don't know how cool that work can be, which is to promote all that work, right? To recognize the importance of each individuality.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of excitement there also.
There's so much excitement, and I've said for the past couple of years now that we're at this convergence of all these cool things happening. Just look at the work that you are doing, Charles, with Old People Are Cool.
Yeah.
And we're seeing those initiatives not only in our own country but throughout the world in trying to elevate this issue and to show that old people are cool. And that there's value, that we all have value, no matter our age and no matter also where we live. I think that's important as well. So thank you for that. Yeah. On the next slide, there's something that I added because I think we need to think about this piece of it as well, if you want to go to that. And that's regarding what's going on right now with COVID-19. I mean, you can ask yourselves these questions as well. Are you worried what will happen because you're over 60? I've had so many friends, especially when we first started hearing about the outbreak, and the directives that were coming out weren't solely focused on people over the age of 60, but they thought to myself, oh my goodness, I never thought that I was in a certain age group that was, you know, going to be impacted, and I'm 61 and I'm in that age group now. We see senior hours at the local grocery store for people over the age of 60, a lot of them. People are staying in their home because they feel that they're at higher risk. And overall, we have this struggle going on of people trying to embrace their age, as I see people talking about in the chat, people embracing their age while also being a little bit fearful of what it means to them with what's going on. Now, this is that balance that we have, is we have to recognize in a sense that yes, we have a virus going on, that although it impacts people of any age, it can be more severely affected by people who are of a certain age with certain pre-existing conditions. So we have to walk that line of saying, okay, you know, yes, I am 75 and I'm embracing that, and I'm taking some precautions because of it. That's okay. So I just think that in this time when we do talk about age so much with this virus, we need to be realistic and we need to be thoughtful. But once again, it all starts with us and really looking at what we're doing, why we're doing it, what we're thinking about, and why we're thinking it. So let's go to the next slide just briefly, because I want to talk about how our own attitudes affect the work that we're doing. And I think the first thing that I want to say here, and it's something, Charles, that you said in the beginning with your quote, if you want to go to my next slide, is that no matter our age, we're not all the same. And that's so important for us to remember, is that we're all individuals. The people that we work with, no matter their age, no matter where they're living, are all individuals as well. Now, obviously, you see that I have one family picture you've already seen with my mother and son. The picture on the far lower left is of my sister and my brother-in-law, the one that I was trying to buy a card for. And, you know, he's a great example of somebody who's growing older and feeling like he's lumped together with so many other people. I get different examples from him all the time. And last week, he did a telehealth visit with his primary care physician, and it was a 6-month Medicare checkup, a Medicare wellness check. I don't know if any of you have experienced those, but it's a list of a series of questions that a physician or a nurse will ask. And it's not only things regarding cognitive assessments, but it's things like, do you have pain? Do you have throw rugs in your house? All these different things. Well, my 72-year-old brother-in-law, soon to be 73 this Thursday, was asked the question, do you have pain? Now, his primary care physician has taken care of him for years, knows that he's an athlete. He's had hip and knee replacements because of that. He plays tennis 3 times a week now. He bikes every day, all of these things. And the nurse asked him if he had pain. And he said, yeah, I have pain every time I serve. And she said, what? And he said, when I serve, when I play tennis, I have pain when I put my arm above my head. And she said, you play tennis? And he's like, well, yeah, I play tennis 3 times a week. And she's like, well, that's not the type of pain I'm talking about. And he's like, well, that's the only pain I have. And it was this conversation, because my brother-in-law is a civil engineer and very literal, but these are the conversations that he has with providers all the time when they make assumptions about something based on his age alone. And I just think that's a great example of something we need to remember. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I want to point this out too, and I heard somebody, or I saw somebody use the word graceful, I believe, in the chat box when they were talking about aging, sorry. my dog just actually took my computer cord with him. So this is what happens when we're all working at home, right?
Yeah.
So this is George Etzweiler. And I love some of the images that come out of Growing Bolder, but I also want to caution us about some of this. So George, when this story ran, was 98 years old. And this is a picture of him running up Mount Washington in New Hampshire. There's a marathon up Mount Washington every year, and George was running it. If you don't know Mount Washington, it's the highest peak in the Northeast. Now, this is incredibly impressive, right? George is 98 years old, and he's running up Mount Washington. They're even walking up Mount Washington in a marathon. I want to make sure we understand that this would be impressive probably for a lot of us. I know it would be impressive for me if I did this. It'd be impressive for my children. This isn't just impressive because George is 98. This is impressive for all of us. And so when we use words on the next slide, like positive and successful and healthy and graceful to talk about aging, they at first sound like the ideal, like what we should all be striving for. But what I think we need to remember is about what it's like for everyone growing older.
Yeah.
So we should ask ourselves the question on the next slide. How do we reconcile growing older when we have some sort of illness or decline or loss of ability? Does that mean we're not successful? Does it mean we failed at aging? Do gray hairs and wrinkles mean that we're not graceful or aging gracefully? I think we need to be really intentional and thoughtful about the words that we use when we talk about this so that we don't alienate anyone. There is a woman that I work with who, I don't know if anyone has heard about this, but it's called the Passion Project. And it's a series of photographs of people who are usually older people, and they're showing their passions. The pictures are all about their passions. And so it doesn't matter what their age is or what their abilities or disabilities are. It's all about what they're passionate about, what provides them meaning and purpose and engagement. And I love that depiction of all of us because it takes age out of the equation. It really talks about us as individuals. And so I really think we need to think about that, especially in consideration of the people that we work with. So let's go to the next slide. And we have a little over 5 minutes left. And what I want to do in these last 5 minutes is really talk about how ageism affects the type of care and support that we provide. So Charles, if you could advance 2 slides.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit about the practices, the design, and then the system and how ageism affects these things. When we look at our practices, just think about some of this. And I'm just going to use some personal examples, and maybe you have some as well. But a lot of times we have this paternalistic attitude when we're working with people who are growing older or people who are older, that we know best and that we should be the ones making the decisions. I find this with my mother all the time, that I tend to do this. I tend to get into this mode. She has a set of very steep stairs in her townhouse. And at one point when she broke her wrist, I said, Mom, you can't go up and down the stairs. That's going to be too hard for you. You won't be able to hold on. You won't be able to hold on to the railing. And she finally said to me, Penny, I'm 86 years old. I've been through life. I know what I can do. I know what I can't do. I'm not going to do anything stupid. It's like, okay, you know, you're right. But I think that this is something we do all the time, that we feel that we know best. And you know what? I don't say the same things in the same way to my sons, who do things that I can't even believe when they rock climb and they don't use ropes and things like that. You know, I'll say something to them like, be careful, don't be stupid. but then I usually leave it. I don't nag about it. With my mother, I felt that she should listen to me, that I knew best, that of course I was going to tell her this. I also think we have a tendency to prioritize safety over choice. You know, we talk about this idea of the dignity of risk. We all take risks all the time in our life, whether, you know, we choose to drive a car, whether we go skiing, whether, you know, we go out for a run, whether we're cutting up vegetables with a very sharp knife. We take risks all the time. That's a part of life. And even for people who are growing older, even for people who live in care communities, there has to be that dignity of risk. We categorize people in cohorts instead of individuals, just like we're seeing with COVID-19, you know, everyone over the age of 60. Well, think about that, 60 to potentially 100. That's a 40-year span of life. We can't categorize people over 40 years and think everyone is the same. And we dismiss symptoms as being caused by old age. This is something that I think that people find quite a bit when they go to their doctor and they have pain somewhere, they have something going on, and a doctor will say, well, you're just getting older. That's not something that we would say to a younger person. And this idea of using substitute names for people, maybe I put this on there because this is just a pet peeve of mine, but sweetie and cutie and honey, and sometimes that's cultural. I will say that. Sometimes, of course, the intention is usually very good. It's meant to be endearing. But I think we need to ask people if that's okay with them. I will tell you that I do not like when somebody calls me that, and I will push back on that. I just think we need to be mindful of that. Next slide, Charles. Mm-hmm. This is something that I think is becoming particularly important as we're dealing with the virus in senior living communities, and that's the design. And this slide is specifically meant to be focused on the design of senior living communities. And this applies to mostly nursing homes, although assisted living communities as well. You know, we've always had these group activities in senior living. That was the traditional way of delivering activities. And again, it's grouping people together, assuming that everybody likes the same thing. And thank goodness that in the past many years, we've moved away from that. But think about now, think about the fact that we've had to move away from this. And so those communities that have really focused on individuals, like so many of you have done, and really gotten to know people and what gives them meaning and purpose, and catered engagement to specific people, kudos to you. And you're probably ahead of the curve. We still have a lot of communities out there across the country who really have focused the majority of their effort on group activities. That's really ageist when we think about it. It's not about the individual person. Think about how we designed nursing homes, and again, some assisted living communities too, with more than one person living in a space and sharing a bathroom, with thin curtains separating spaces, that lack of privacy. I'm not sure that we do that to another group of people. That lack of outdoor space, thinking that okay, people are older, they don't need to go outdoors, or not having that availability for access. These are some traditional designs that we used to incorporate. And unfortunately, I'll tell you, even some new construction still does. I love the fact that we've made so much progress, but we still need to remember some of these things because they're still happening. We still have in some nursing homes 3 people living in the same room. Imagine what that's like right now. Next slide. And this is probably where we see ageism the most, and that's in our overall system. You know, I always say that nobody in senior living and aging services ever goes to work and says, I'm going to do a bad job today. I'm not going to be caring today. But the system that we put into place sometimes, unfortunately, reinforces that. So we have a long-term care system that continues to support that communal living concept and doesn't always address individuals. It doesn't always support people and where they want to live. We see these policy initiatives even right now causing divisiveness between age groups. Sometimes there's this pitting of a younger generation against an older generation, especially when it comes to resources. And we have regulations and reimbursement systems that aren't necessarily aligned, and they're not necessarily aligned in the person-centered practices that we want to put forward and move forward. We also see right now that senior living is sort of at the low end of even the supply chain. We're seeing that, as hospitals are competing with states, it's competing against sometimes the federal government to get personal protective equipment. We have nursing homes that are competing against hospitals. We have nursing homes and assisted living communities that cannot get the equipment that they need. We have this being talked about in the media now, where nursing homes have been portrayed, senior living has sometimes been portrayed as places where people don't want to work. And now we have that image that they're being sort of forgotten and what's going on with the virus as well. So I think we really need to think about the way the system itself is ageist. So Charles, we're going to go to the very positive of this as we end. And that's how person-centered living is the antidote to ageism. And this is what's so important. And I think this is what all these different movements that Charles brought up and how we have this convergence of combating ageism, this is what's going on, because we know that there's an alternative and it's really person-centered living. And that's pretty simple. These are actually 4 principles of the Pioneer Network. And I think that these principles really are so applicable to what we're talking about. The first one really encompasses, I think, it all, to know each person. When you know a person and you realize that they can and do make a difference, it's really hard to lump them together with others. They're individuals. They're a person themselves with their own unique story. And it's hard to stereotype them and put them in the same bucket as somebody else. We want to respond to people's spirit as well as their mind and body. And that's just looking at people as whole people, not parts of a person. And realize that everyone can continue to grow. I think that if we focus on these 4 things, that we have a fighting chance of combating ageism, of battling ageism, and to make it a thing of the past as we move forward. You want to go to the next slide, Charles? Actually, go to the next slide. And we'll end with this.
Yeah, we have 2-3 minutes left.
Yep. I just want to give you some examples of how we can think differently. And I want to recommend this book because it's one of my favorite books. No kickback or anything from this, but this is from my friend Wendy Lusbader. And I just love the title, Life Gets Better, The Unexpected Pleasures of Growing Older. This is a great book to read because what Wendy says is, of course, there are some things that happen when you get older that maybe you don't necessarily like. There's some physical decline, but you know what? Overall, life does get better. So I want you to catch yourself when you're having that negative response to aging. Think about those questions that we talked about. Think about the questions or the language that you use. When you're buying a product, think about what it's saying, and then challenge those around you as well. Take some of what we've talked about and challenge those around you, not in a way that's going to make them defensive, but just in a way that makes them think. Sometimes it's all about creating that awareness. So I want to thank you all so much. I hope that this was useful to you, especially during this time, and maybe we can talk about it some more some other time, especially as we get on the other side of this.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Penny, for joining, and thanks everyone for participating so vividly and on the chat. It's been great. For me, Penny, like one of your messages, which is kind of, it starts with us, is I couldn't agree more. Like, it starts with the way we behave, we talk, we act, and recognizing that we can't be perfect. But I think that starting by recognizing that and doing small changes is the best way and the way, actually. So thanks for joining, Penny. Thank you for everyone for being on this webinar today. Penny, I'd like to mention the fact that your organization has released an amazing resource to combat isolation. So I want to invite everyone on the webinar today to go and check out the Pioneer Network for the awesome work, but also this resource library, which is an awesome library that I've checked several times myself, that will help you with very tangible and easy to apply tools to combat isolation with what we're going through with COVID-19. Our friends at Preference-Based Living also just released a tool to help us understand how to honor the preferences of the older adults that we serve in senior living. And so that's a tip sheet on their website. I want to remind everyone of our initiative called Activity Strong, and also mention to you that in parallel to the track of webinars that we've developed, we're also trying to put out, at least on a bi-weekly basis, more programs and content in there. And you probably saw the announcement 2 weeks ago. We're providing access to Link Senior for free until July 4th. And to get access to Link Senior, you just need to go to our website, sign up there, and we'll be in touch within 24 hours. So anyone in activities and life enrichment, rec therapy, I invite you to go there. And then the last of my slides here is All People Are Cool. And again, Penny, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to flash your contact here so that people can reach out if they have any questions. Feel free to connect with both organizations. Pioneer Network, Penny, thank you for joining today, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you, Charles.
Take care, Penny. We're going to leave the room open with our upcoming webinars. And Megan, I'll let you close with a couple of announcements. Well, with the announcement about CEUs.
Yes, so I have put the CEU survey link in the webinar chat box. And just know that you will also be receiving that survey link along with a recording of today's webinar and the slides from today's webinar in your email today. Do check your spam folder just in case it lands there. And in addition to the webinars you're seeing on the screen now, I do want to remind folks that we're doing a special edition webinar on Tuesday, April 28th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. That's featuring Dawn Worsley and Ann Ellett about meaningful engagement in the time of COVID-19. And you'll be receiving a registration link for that in this afternoon's email as well. So we hope to see you then. Penny, thank you so much. Charles, thank you. And as Charles said, we'll leave the webinar room open for people to continue to fill in the survey link. Thank you.
Cool.